I wanted to take a look at this article on the Friendly Atheist website, but it's been circulating all over the internet lately. It's getting a lot of attention, as it well should. But the article is entitled Jehovah's Witnesses Forced a Teen to Listen to Audio of Her Own. Obviously, this is a pretty serious situation, and I don't expect monetization out of this. I'm just going to try to be watching my language if possible so that it doesn't get age restricted, because I want this to be viewed by the maximum number of people, and that means watching the words that I use. So let's give the article a read and see what it says. This is by Val Wild. Earlier this week, the Utah Supreme Court heard a horrific case alleging that more than a decade ago, Jehovah's Witness leaders psychologically tortured a 15-year-old girl by forcing her to listen to an audio recording of her own. The woman, whose name we have chosen not to print here, good idea probably, says that a fellow congregant 4 years her senior first her in December of 2007. It happened multiple times and recorded at least one of those instances. Then, for unknown reasons, he provided a copy of the recordings to the congregation's leadership. I would be willing to bet that his reason for doing that was probably because he felt some level of guilt over it. That probably drove him to basically turn himself in. That happens all the time. I turned myself in when I was leaving the religion, when I was on my way out. I told the Jehovah's Witnesses everything. Like, there was a kid in the congregation who was like following me around, watching what I did and reporting it to the elders and all that. But when it all came down to it, when I was confronted about it, I just came out and told them. I could have lied about it. I could have tried to hide it and stayed in the religion. And in hindsight, that probably would have been the best way to go. But I felt so guilty that I had smoked a cigarette and I had a girlfriend that I had to tell them everything. And I'm guessing that that's probably what the motivations were behind this person giving it over to the congregation's leadership, the elders. So anyways, let's continue reading the article. Given that the age of consent in Utah is 18, those leaders should have taken the evidence directly to law enforcement and reached out to offer the girl support in seeking justice, while demanding that take responsibility for his actions and attempt to make amends. 100% agree with you on that. 100% agree. Why the fuck didn't they take this information to law enforcement? I will tell you why. This is the main issue that I have with Jehovah's Witnesses, or one of the main ones at least. The organization wants to be structured in such a way that when society inevitably collapses, as they believe it will, when Armageddon comes, they want to be set up as a government that will take leadership and control of people's lives once the, U.S. government and the EU and every other government in the world collapses because of the war between Satan and God, basically. They want to be positioned in such a way that they form out their own government. And as a result of that, this was treated as a spiritual matter rather than the criminal matter that it is. Turning this information over to law enforcement is basically ceding governmental leadership to the U.S. government. And that's not what they do. They don't believe in that. They want to run their own government. Unfortunately, they don't have investigators, and they can't violate people's rights by jailing them, for example. So they are completely unqualified to act as a government. Like, they shouldn't be doing this. They should have turned it over to the police from the start. Anyway, let's continue reading. Given that the age of consent in Utah is 18, those leaders should have taken the evidence directly to law enforcement and reached out to offer the girl support in seeking justice, while demanding that the take responsibility for his actions and attempt to make amends. Of course, that's not what happened. Big surprise. Premarital sex is a sin in their faith, so a tribunal of church elders, tribunal being the judicial committee, the judicial committee convened in an attempt to convince her to confess. They wanted her to admit that she'd engaged in consensual sex outside the bonds of matrimony. The meeting, during which they played the recording repeatedly, lasted at least 4 hours. That's standard for a judicial committee. I think mine was only like an hour and a half. Oop, Kitty wants to leave. Okay. She was, at the time, still a minor. The tribunal convened in 2008. After suffering from trauma symptoms that impacted her day-to-day life for years, she filed a lawsuit alleging intentional infliction of emotional distress, or, to put it in simpler terms, emotional abuse. She wanted those leaders to be held accountable for traumatizing her. Can't fucking blame her on that one. Can't fucking blame her on that one. They deserve it. In my eyes, what the Judicial Committee or what the Jehovah's Witness leadership did here, as far as I'm concerned, this is a crime that they committed. This is horrific. This is obviously a horrific situation. Who in their right mind would do this to somebody? Who sat there and thought to themselves, I think that's the right thing to do. I think the right thing to do is to play this. This is such a fucking disgusting and horrific situation. It's hard to bear, but let me continue on. The main problem that I see with this is the fact that nobody in their right mind should sit there and think to themselves, this is the right thing to do. We should play this in front of her. We should play this for her to listen to. We should do this. How did they come to that conclusion? Anybody in their right mind would not do that, right? Like even you would have to be sadistic to do something like this. The problem here is the fact that the elders and Jehovah's Witnesses more generally have largely adopted the moral system of this overarching ideology. The governing body defines the morality, and the Jehovah's Witnesses pick it up. Morality and conscience is something that forms over your entire life. It isn't something that you can switch on and off. There's something in the back of your mind, usually, telling you, this is wrong, I shouldn't be doing this. How did that get switched off with these people? It does not just switch off. It takes years of programming to form out an entirely new moral system that's structured around an ideology like this. These people, if they hadn't been Jehovah's Witnesses, would have known full well how fucking wrong this was to do. The moral system that they picked up from Jehovah's Witnesses pushes that aside, sweeps it aside, and forgets it. The moral thing to do is to play this for this girl to see her reactions. The moral thing to do is to not call the police but handle it internally. That's what they're thinking. That's what's going through these people's heads. This is a result of a complete personality change in the leadership, in all of the members. That's what's happening here. This is what defines a cult. If it's forming out an entirely new personality, if it's trying to force you to use their doctrine as a moral system instead of your conscience, it's a cult. That's the foundation of a cult. Let's keep reading. In addition to the 4 elders who participated directly in the tribunal, she sued her local Kingdom Hall and the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the nationwide organization that governs the witnesses as an organization. The case initially came before the 2nd Judicial District Court in 2016. That's a U.S. government court, not a judicial committee from Jehovah's Witnesses. While that court admitted at the hearing that it would have no hesitation about proceeding with the case if the abuse had taken place in a secular setting, the religious angle complicated matters. Why? Why does this complicate matters? How could this possibly complicate anything? Something is either morally wrong or it's morally right. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This should not be complicated by religion. It was morally wrong for the elders to do this. Period. It doesn't matter if it was in a church or on a fucking balcony or anything. Doesn't matter if it was in another country. It's morally wrong to do. So what does the secular setting have to do with this? Let's keep reading. Ultimately, they ruled that holding the church liable for traumatizing a young teenager would violate the leader's First Amendment right. Are you fucking kidding me? Not reporting a crime to the police is violating people's First Amendment rights? Give me a fucking break. There was a crime committed and they didn't want to report it to the police. I don't understand how the judge came to this conclusion. This guy should be disbarred or kicked out or impeached or whatever the fuck happens to judges. This is insane. To say that another way, because these leaders allegedly traumatized a girl in a religious setting for religious reasons, there's a legal discussion taking place over whether the courts can do anything about it at all. It shouldn't matter where this happens. Robert Friedman of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection, who's serving as the plaintiff's attorney, says the lower courts got it wrong. While he and his colleagues acknowledged that religion was a motivating factor for the elders' behavior, their appeal argues that it cannot justify their clearly reprehensible actions. This is a quote from them. The Establishment Clause's prohibition on government action respecting an establishment of religion does not immunize intentionally tortuous conduct. Tortuous being a tort. I think it's referring to a tort. I learned about this in some law classes I took in high school or something. A tort is a wrongful act or an infringement of a right, other than under contract, leading to civil legal liability. So the tortuous conduct to which they're referring here, it's a legal infraction, basically. Like the seriously harmful acts at issue here, simply because the tortfeasor has a religious motive or the conduct somehow relates to religious discipline. That rule, if allowed to stand, would give actors free rein to injure others under the guise of religious freedom. Could not agree with this more. Imagine a religious person believing that they have to sacrifice somebody to maintain their good graces with God. Okay, here's a good example. There are some Satanists, a Satanist cult called the Order of Nine Angles. It is an extremist cult who literally believes in blood sacrifice. You have to kill somebody to fulfill your worship to Satan. It's very, very extreme. Now, usually these people work around the laws by joining the military or joining the police force. Then they say the prayer after killing somebody, and their worship has been fulfilled. So, technically, falling within legal bounds. Morally fucking wrong. Don't get me wrong there, period. Morally fucking wrong. But, what if they just started going around killing people just because? Just because they wanted to fulfill their worship. Would they have free reign to do that because it's a church? Because it's a religious belief? Can they just go around killing whoever they want? That's basically what's happening here. That's basically what's being said by these judges. That it's okay to do literally anything if it's your religious belief that you should. What are these people thinking? Where the fuck are their heads? This is insane. Let's keep reading. This is back to the quote. When a defendant violates an independent and religiously neutral principle of civil law, the Establishment Clause imposes no obstacle to relief, even if that defendant asserts that he was motivated by a religious belief. This is Van Wilde speaking now. Defense attorney Cara Porter, described on her firm's website as one of the most experienced and successful appellate lawyers in Utah, argues that the government is legally prohibited from meddling in a church's efforts to determine whether a congregant has committed a sin. She also argued that while she would draw the line at physical torture, infliction of emotional distress is less clear-cut. Infliction of emotional distress is less clear-cut. Justice Dino Himonas had a strong and succinct response to that. Quote, the allegation here is a mental and emotional equivalent of waterboarding. I've been a judge for a long time and a lawyer for a long time. I've never seen in court anything like this that's alleged. This is Van Wilde speaking again. But not everyone on the bench was quite so confident in the court's ability to draw lines separating permissible acts from emotionally abusive ones. Judge Paige Peterson offered up a philosophical objection, as reporter Annie Knox noted. Quote, Judge Peterson said the answer may be a matter of degrees. Simply convening the church tribunal process could distress a person in the faith who knows the conduct is viewed as a sin, Peterson noted. On the other end of the spectrum, she said, a group may believe it must do anything necessary to find out what happened, even if the process includes torture. Jesus Christ, dude. It's not their responsibility to do this. It's the investigators' responsibility. It's the police's responsibility. This is the core issue with Jehovah's Witnesses. They want to be the government. They want to be in control and manage the people like a government is supposed to. But they live inside the U.S. They have to live within the confines of the law. They can't do that shit. And they don't even have the resources anyways to act as investigators, even if they wanted to. They're not allowed to do blood tests or DNA tests. They're not allowed to take fingerprints and compare it to a national database or any of the other shit that goes along with investigating. They're not investigators. They shouldn't be doing this shit. They shouldn't be involved at all. Give this information to the court system, give it to the police, and let them figure it out. Don't torture people over it. Sadly, this situation isn't that rare. This isn't the only case. The Jehovah's Witnesses have been sued for something similar so many times and lost so many times that they had to sell their giant headquarters in New York to pay for the lawsuits, to pay the fines that they were charged, to pay for the settlements. I hope that this serves as an example to the Watchtower Society that you have to follow the law and you have to live within the confines of morality, whether that's your morality or not. You can't just do shit like this and get away with it. So I'm hoping as this situation plays out, we'll see some real justice